Good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. Before we get into it, I just want to quickly thank our team for all their efforts and hard work responding to the FERC Interconnect NOPR. FERC just promulgated the final interconnect rules a few days ago, and they must have cited the Colorado PUC comments something like 50 times. Although we're still going through the rule, it looks like there's nothing in the final rules that would undercut our ability to continue to award interconnect to the winning bidders in the Colorado ERP process, which is a big improvement over the initial draft. There's also a concurrence from FERC Commissioner Clements exploring how the FERC interconnect rules interact with competitive resource solicitations like our ERP process, which quotes several paragraphs of our comments verbatim and may help frame future FERC efforts. So anyway, special shout out to Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Rosati, Ms. Rosen, and Mr. Davis, as well as both of you for all their assistance with this, and also to Excel, Tri-State, and Black Hills for their efforts, all of which collectively helped protect the integrity of our ERP process. So thanks to all and greatly appreciated. With that, Commissioner Plant, any preliminary comments? Are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I am ready to approve the consent agenda, and I would echo your congratulations. Thanks.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, and thank you for your leadership on that issue in terms of getting those comments in. And that sounds like good news. I'm prepared to approve the consent agenda as presented, and apologies in advance. I have something in my eye, so there will be a lot of excessive blinking. Just
so if we see tears, it's not on my comments.
I've been trying hard, but it's pretty distracting. Sorry.
So even if you wink when you make a decision, you actually mean it. It's not a kind of joke.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just going to be a lot of blinking. I'm sorry.
Thanks for the heads up, and I approve the consent agenda as well. With that, let's turn to proceeding number 22I-0471R, the Sable Boulevard accident and corrective action plan. Mr. Acera.
Yeah, good morning, Commissioners. Recently, a law enforcement agency served RTD a subpoena requesting information and data related to RTD's investigation of a derailment at Sable Boulevard and Exposition Ave. RTD indicates that the derailment accident report, along with related information reports and other evidence used to create that report, is responsive to the subpoena. So RTD filed the motion before you today, asking for a decision from the Commission, either authorizing or prohibiting the disclosure of the report and related information in response to that subpoena. RTD is also asking that you waive response time to the motion because there are no parties to this administrative proceeding, and waive certain confidentiality rules that don't really apply to this situation, like filing an NDA, form NDA, and a list of individuals with access to certain information. So under Title 40, Article 18, Section 104, and PUC Rule 7349D, as subparagraphs 3 and 4, derailment accident reports and all the information that's used to determine the cause of accident are actually developed by the Rail Authority, and then they're submitted to the PUC, where staff reviews them and determines whether there's any additional information required. The accident reports are submitted under seal and treated as highly confidential. And once the report is submitted, it actually becomes an investigative report of the Commission. So with that background, I recommend that you authorize RTD to disclose the report and related information and documents in response to the subpoena, as well as the other requests. RTD created the report in the first instance, and it appears that our rules, although they work well in most situations, have created this need for RTD to ask us for permission to provide a report that it authored.
Commissioner Plant.
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision, Mr. Acera, granting the motion. So thank you, sir.
Sounds good.
Proceeding number 23M-0355, TO, SNR Affordable Towing. Ms. Rosati.
Good morning, Commissioners. On June 30th, 2023, SNR Affordable Towing filed a letter requesting to appeal a denial of a towing permit application. As stated in the letter, its towing permit application was denied through a commission staff denial letter dated April 13th, 2023. Included in the denial letter's reasoning is the fact that the applicant has been charged with multiple crimes. SNR Towing's letter states that its principals have not been convicted of any crimes, but that there are current criminal charges pending. SNR Towing requests a continuance on setting a hearing for its requested appeal until the pending cases are resolved. Additionally, SNR Towing's letter states that it is aware of the 60-day window to appeal the application denial, which ended June 12th, and it explains that it experienced technical difficulties when it attempted to transmit a letter requesting appeal on that date. Rule 6504 of the Commission's rules regulating transportation by motor vehicle sets forth the Commission's provisions regarding criminal history checks for principals of a towing carrier. Rule 6504D provides that if a disqualifying criminal history record is found, the applicant may file a petition to qualify the applicant within 60 days of Commission staff's notification. Unless there are any questions, I can proceed to a recommendation.
Yeah, go ahead. If you could give your recommendation, that'd be great.
While this is not stated in SNR Towing's letter, it appears that SNR Towing intended to file a petition to qualify the applicant under Rule 6504D. I recommend construing the letter as a petition filed under this rule. I further recommend denying the petition. As SNR Towing acknowledges, it failed to file its petition requesting qualification within 60 days. Additionally, the petition states that criminal cases are still pending, giving no indication that the disqualification set forth in the denial letter was not supported by law or fact, and giving no expectation as to when the criminal cases may conclude. Rather than accepting the late filed petition and waiting to set a hearing until the criminal cases are resolved, I recommend recognizing that the applicant may file another application if and when the pending criminal cases are resolved.
Commissioner Plant.
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision. Ms. Rosati denying the petition. So thank you.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 22D-0293T, Homewave LLC. Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Through its petition that initiated this proceeding, staff requested that the Commission find that the requirements of 17-42-103 apply to Voice over Internet Protocol, also known as VoIP service providers. That the Commission define how the term penal communication services in the same statute should be construed, and that the Commission declare that VoIP provider Homewave is subject to the statute. Under this state law, service providers are required to provide records and information in a report to the PUC quarterly for certain communication services provided to correctional facilities in Colorado. Under subsection 4, the PUC is then required to publish the information on its website. The facts in this case are not disputed. Homewave provides a communications platform that enables inmates in Colorado to communicate with friends and family. The platform allows inmates to place voice calls, video calls, and send e-messages using Homewave's app, and provides service to a number of correctional facilities in Colorado. Staff argues that the statutory language is inclusive of VoIP providers such as Homewave, plainly providing communications services for transmitting or exchanging information. Through her recommended decision, the assigned ALJ granted the petition and rejected Homewave's arguments that federal law preempts the reporting requirements in Colorado. That takes us to your decisions today. Homewave did file brief exceptions, arguing that the ALJ erred first in failing to find federal preemption, and second in interpreting the various laws and legal standards regarding public utilities law. Staff did file a timely response, arguing that Homewave's claims are meritless as explained by ALJ Merbaba in her recommended decision. Unless there are questions about the filings generally, I propose that I provide analysis and recommendations in each of the two areas raised for your consideration and discussion, starting first with the arguments regarding federal preemption.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could give us recommendations in both areas. We'll come back with a vote, a discussion, questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. So regarding federal preemption, federal law may preempt state law where a federal statute has an express preemption provision and where federal law impliedly preempts state law. The ALJ properly notes that implied preemption includes circumstances where federal law so thoroughly occupies a field that there is a reasonable inference that Congress left no room for states to supplement regulation, and where state law directly conflicts with federal law such that it is impossible to comply with federal and state requirements, or where the state law stands as an obstacle to executing and accomplishing Congress's full objectives. As an affirmative defense, Homewave bears the burden to establish federal preemption, either through a showing of impossibility or complying with both state and federal law, or an actual conflict. In her order, the ALJ iterates telecommunications federal regulation and history. Parties do not dispute that Homewave provides certain information services through video calling and e-messaging services. The ALJ explains that the FCC lightly regulates information services and does not expressly or impliedly preempt state regulation. As pointed out by staff in its response here to exceptions, Homewave's exceptions make no citation or argument regarding these findings of the ALJ. The ALJ next analyzes Homewave's voice over internet protocol services, which is the focus of Homewave's first argument in exceptions. Noting federal regulations applicable to VoIP, the ALJ finds no federal regulation that expressly or impliedly regulates VoIP such that the state law here is in conflict. On exceptions and before the ALJ, Homewave rests its arguments on the FCC's 2004 Vonage order. The ALJ analyzes that order and subsequent rulings in her recommended decision at length. The ALJ concludes that Homewave fails to establish that its service is fit within the 2004 order. For one, she notes that the service provider appears fixed since they originate from a set location. Vonage does not apply to fixed VoIP. Setting the fixed considerations aside, the ALJ then determined that Homewave failed to establish that it cannot distinguish between intrastate and interstate traffic. Further still, she notes that Vonage preempts state efforts that are dramatically different from the regulations here. Vonage addressed tariff offerings and market entry requirements. Here, the regulations primarily require information and simply align interstate rates with federal thresholds. Homewave makes no arguments for why Vonage should apply at all in these circumstances. Homewave's arguments on exceptions, that this analysis is an error, focus entirely on the claim that its service clearly constitutes nomadic VoIP services, and summarily states that Vonage remains good law and preempts the state regulations here. On review of the cases and findings here, we agree with staff's response that Homewave's exceptions wholly ignore the ALJ's full analysis. Homewave makes no showing that the limited reporting regulations are inconsistent, incompatible, or otherwise impossible to comply with in relation to the federal regulations. For this first area, I do recommend upholding the ALJ and finding that she correctly concludes that Homewave failed to meet its burden, that the regulations here are in any way preempted by federal law. I can pause there for your vote on this first issue.
Commissioner Plant, comments, questions, or a vote?
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I support your recommendation as well.
as do I. Keep going, Ms. McLaughlin.
On the final areas, Homewave makes two brief arguments that the ALJ further erred in her analysis. First, exceptions claim that the recommended decision reads legislative silence as a grant of authority, claiming that Title 17 must explicitly call out VoIP or other IP-enabled services. We recommend rejecting this argument given the plain language of the statute. While Title 40 makes explicit that VoIP and IP-enabled services are exempt from utility regulation, which is consistent with potential conflicts in federal law, Title 17 makes absolutely no technological differentiation for any penal communication service. For the reporting requirements and consistency with federal rate caps provided in Title 17, the language is technologically neutral for all communication services that are provided and can be read in harmony with the exclusion from Title 40 regulations for rate, quality of service, and related regulations. Homewave's final argument is also unsupported and inconsistent with law. Without citation, Homewave states that the Colorado Constitution permits the legislature to delegate authority to the PUC only over public utilities. Homewave argues that the ALJ's reading of the recent Colorado Supreme Court case, Danks, and other case law gives the PUC potential unbounded powers. As the commissioners well know, this is not so. While the commission has broad regulatory authority over public utilities grounded both in the Constitution and statute, there is no prohibition on the legislature delegating authority to the commission in a statutory context. As staff points out in reply, Homewave's reading of Danks and the commission can only regulate public utilities would strip the commission of regulatory authority in a number of areas where the legislature has lawfully delegated authority to the commission. The ALJ rightly rejected these arguments that would lead to absurd results. In sum, Homewave provides no precedent or persuasive arguments to revise the ALJ's order, and we recommend denying Homewave's exceptions and upholding the recommended decision.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Goodman,
I agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC decision denying the exceptions. So thank you, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 23M-000-7T. A letter of registration to provide telecom services. Ms. Buys, Ms. Dundas.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Holly Bice with the Telecom Program Section, along with Commission Counsel Lindsay Dundas. On January 3rd, 2023, the Commission opened proceeding 23M-0007T for those who are subject to Commission rules regulating telecommunication services and providers of telecommunication services to file their annual report and DR 525s. Rule 2006A provides that carriers required by the Department of Revenue to file an annual DR 525 form pursuant to CRS 42111 must file the same with the Commission on or before May 15th of each year. Approximately 41 carriers have failed to submit the required DR 525 form to the Commission, or the information they provided was not complete. Additionally, through communication with the Department of Revenue, it has also been determined that these 41 carriers have failed to file the required DR 525 form with the Department of Revenue. The decision today is whether to rescind the referral of this proceeding for the limited purpose of issuing a decision to order these carriers who failed to file the required form to file the form, or to provide an explanation as to why they are not required to do so within 14 days of the decision. So with that, I will pause for any discussion or questions before making a recommendation.
And why don't you go on to your recommendation and we'll come back with questions, comments, or a vote.
Sure. We recommend that the Commission, pursuant to 46101, rescind the referral of this proceeding for the limited purpose of issuing a decision discussed today. We recommend that the decision order the entities that have not yet filed the DR 525 form to do so with the Commission no later than 14 days from the mail date of this decision, or they must provide the Commission an explanation of why they are not required to do so by the same deadline.
Thank you, Ms. Bice. Commissioner Plant.
Thank you, and I support the recommendation. I have a quick question, Ms. Bice, it seems as though they haven't submitted these forms repeatedly in the past. And in the event that they don't respond within the 14 days, what is the remedy? What actually happens?
So ideally, the next step would probably be for a show cause, but we also need to investigate whether these companies are still in are active in Colorado. We do suspect that some of these companies may have not indicated to the commission that they're no longer operating in the state. So it will require, if we don't hear a response, to do a little bit of digging and determine whether they still are in operation in the state.
Okay, so it may just be that a lot of these companies have gone out of business in the past.
We suspect so. Going back and looking at the last time they filed any type of application or CPCN with the commission, we can go back maybe a couple of years and see the lack of response. And so for those that we can indicate are no longer operating, I think will be fairly easy. There are some that are still actively filing other required commission documents, but not the DR 525. So for those are really the ones that I believe that we should be focusing on, because we show that they have revenue and we show that they should be filing these documents with the commission and with the Department of Revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Gutman.
Thanks. I appreciated that question. That was helpful and understand. I agree with your recommendation, Ms. Bud.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision, rescinding the referral and ordering telecom carriers to file their forms. So
Great.
Thank you, Ms. Bice.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 21A-0141E, the Public Service Company of Colorado, ERP, extension of time, and maybe some other issues. Mr. Eden, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory staff. Today, I'll present two issues for your consideration. The first is an unopposed motion for additional time to file the 120-day report and associated partial waivers of rules 3613 subpart D through H that Public Service Company of Colorado filed on July 27th, 2023. The second matter concerns the Phase 1 decisions directives that Public Service makes certain filings regarding deferred tax assets or DTA levels. I'll present the unopposed motion first before moving to the DTA issue. So back in December 2022, Public Service issued the request for proposals for an all-source competitive bidding process to meet the company's resource needs consistent with the Commission's Phase 1 decision. Bids were due by March 1st, 2023. Per Rule 3613, the receipt of bids sets the timeline for several Phase 2 events, including the filing of the 120-day report. The 120-day report is an important milestone in Phase 2 because it shows which bids the model selects in various portfolios and sets several other deadlines, including, for example, the report from the independent evaluator and the Phase 2 comments from interveners. Back in March of 2023, Public Service filed an unopposed motion to, among other things, extend the deadline for the 120-day report by an additional 50 days. The Commission granted this unopposed motion. In the current motion, Public Service asked for a second extension to file the 120-day report. Specifically, Public Service asks for a 24-day extension, which would move the deadline from August 18, 2023 to September 11, 2023. The company argues that because the volume of bids and unanticipated challenges with the Encompass model, it will not be able to complete the 120-day report by the current August 18 deadline. Public Service also requests a corresponding extension of all deadlines that flow from the filing of the 120-day report, such as the deadline for intervener comments and the deadline for Public Service to initiate the performance incentive mechanism stakeholder process. Because some of these deadlines are set forth in Rules 3613 subpart D through H, Public Service requests a partial waiver of the relevant regulatory provisions. Public Service states that it conferred with all of the parties in this proceeding and that the motion for second extension is unopposed. The company asks that the Commission shorten the response time to close of business on July 31st, 2023. On July 28th, several parties representing independent power producers or IPPs filed a response to the motion for second extension. These parties consist of the Colorado Independent Energy Association, Colorado Solar and Storage Association, Solar Energy Industries Association, Interwest Energy Alliance, and Onward Energy Management. I'll refer to these parties collectively as the joint IPP interests. The joint IPP interests explain that while delays are disappointing and difficult for the IPP community, it is critically important that public service file a report that is complete and carefully presented. Thus, the joint IPP interests do not oppose the motion for second extension, but they do urge the Commission to issue a Phase 2 decision before the end of 2023. No other responses to the motion for second extension have been filed. I'll stop here for any questions on Public Services motion for a second extension, or I can offer a recommendation.
Yeah, if you could jump to your recommendation, that'd be great.
Advisors recommend that the Commission grant the motion for second extension. While a further delay of Phase 2 is not ideal, Public Service asserts that it is simply unable to complete the 120-day report by the current deadline. Moreover, even though delays impose significant burdens on project developers, both the company and the joint IPP interest agree about the importance of having a complete, cogent, and transparent 120-day report. So for the reasons set forth in the motion for second extension and the joint IPP interest response, advisors recommend that the Commission extend the 120-day report deadline by an additional 24 days and adjust all deadlines that flow from the 120-day report accordingly, grant a partial waiver of rules 3613 subpart D through H, and waive the remaining response time to the unopposed motion for second extension.
Commissioner Plant,
Fourth recommendation.
Commissioner Goman,
I agree.
as do I. It seems like it's more important to get it right than to get it quick. We may want to suggest a new name for the 120-day report. As things get more complicated, that name may be more aspirational. But putting that aside, why don't you keep going, Mr. Eden?
Sure. So I'll address the DTA issue next. And as background for the listening public, federal tax credits are often a substantial component of the economics of renewable resources, including utility-owned renewable resources. In the past, however, Public Service couldn't monetize all of the federal tax credits its renewable resources generated because Public Service did not have sufficient taxable income. When this occurs, the unused tax credits become a DTA on the company's books until the company has the tax appetite to use them. The Phase 1 decision requires Public Service to submit a forecast of its DTA levels for the next 10 years. The Commission also required the company to confer with staff on whether there is a modeling methodology that could evaluate DTA impacts on a project level. And staff in the company were required to report to the Commission the results of the conferral. The deadline for the DTA forecast was 60 days from the date of the Phase 1 decision, which would make the deadline November 20th, 2022. On November 18, 2022, Public Service filed a notice indicating that it has been engaging with staff, but that the company needs more time. Public Service went on to file several more such notices. The last notice was the 5th updated notice that Public Service filed on March 3rd, 2023. However, Public Service has not yet filed either the required DTA forecast or the conferral report. With that, I'll open it up for you to discuss how the Commission would like to proceed regarding the DTA filing requirements.
I guess I'll just start off with a question to you, Mr. Eden. It seems like we're still waiting for guidance from the IRS on the transferability of the ITC and PTC tax credits, which, as I seem to recall from the electric rate case, has really quite large financial implications for the company's, financial statements. So, is that IRS guidance still not out? And given that really massive uncertainty, any advice about how we ran into that?
I'm afraid I can't answer your question about the status of the IRS guidance on the tax transferability, but I would agree that that will have, or it's expected that that will have a big impact on this DTA issue and its application for RRR of the Commission's Phase 1 decision. The company cited the recent passage of the IRA and said that, you know, while a forecast of the DTA levels was always going to be difficult with this change in law that the IRA introduces, it becomes pretty difficult to know whether this will continue to be an issue going forward.
Froze for a second. What do you think about just asking the company for an update on, you know, where the IRS stands and, you know, where they're at with this issue instead of trying to request a specific response? Any thoughts on that? And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be helpful. I think the important thing here is that as we're quickly approaching the extended deadline for the 120-day report, the Commission has more information about the status of the conferral process and where the company and staff think that the DTA issue is headed based on the information that they currently have.
Hey, Commissioner Plant, I think the rough idea on the table is ask for an update on the conferral process and maybe where the IRS guidance is, but Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I support that. You may have already gotten this in previous responses from the company, but just as sort of an estimate of what the potential impact is of a variety of, you know, the IRA provisions being applied, you know, would be, I think, informative for us. Included in that update. I'm not sure if you've been provided with that already or not.
Yeah, maybe not in this case. Some of it was in the electric rate case, so maybe it needs to be in this record too. Good point. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, probably some amendments in addition to what you brought up. So, I mean, to me, the issue is we really want transparency about what's going to be modeled for Phase 2. And the intention was to have that well in advance of the Phase 2 modeling. Clearly, where we are is pretty close right at the Phase 2 modeling. So I'm a little disappointed that the you know, requested reporting just kind of fizzled or stopped. I think this is important from a transparency purpose to understand what's going on here. So I would certainly agree with requesting the company to file an update on how that conferral process went, what the outcome was, if there's consensus on the outcome, or if there's still disagreement about the intended treatment. And I'd like them to explicitly lay out what their intended treatment of DTA is in the modeling for Phase 2, because that's the big issue here is we don't know what we're about to get in that modeling. And the intention was to know and have that be transparent well ahead of time. Probably less of an issue if there is consensus on what that approach should be, but we just don't know that. So I would add that portion about them being clear about what their assumptions are in the Phase 2 modeling and why, and if there's agreement on those assumptions. Clearly, if they have a DTA forecast that they are using in the modeling, I would request that they supply that as was originally asked as part of the conferral. But just in general, I think we really could stand to benefit a lot from an update here. And it's clear some things have happened that either we're not aware of or haven't been filed or whatever. So so that would be helpful. Certainly if the company wants to articulate in that response how different factors might influence how this plays out, that's fine. And that's helpful. But I think the crux of this is we need to understand what the assumption is in the modeling, and we just don't know that at this point.
Well, I just say I'm strongly supportive of asking the company for more detail about how they want to go into Phase 2. I'm just open to the idea that the IRS guidance on transferability is a binary thing with enormous influence one way or the other, and it's just really difficult to, with that uncertainty, to specify. But I think the order can ask them for an update along the lines of what you outlined, Commissioner Gilman. So Commissioner Plant, anything else you want to add?
No, that that sounds like a great path forward. I'm just wondering what the time frame is. We should ask for that kind of report.
Mr. Eden, Ms. McLaughlin?
Advisors would recommend a deadline of August 16th, 2023. That's 2 weeks from today. It'll be a little bit less than 2 weeks by the time we get the decision out, but that should provide enough time for them to provide the update as you will have all articulated.
Commissioner Gilman, Commissioner Plant, you okay with August 16th?
Yep, that sounds great.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yes.
All right, I think, Mr. Eden, that can be an ABC decision, granting the unopposed motion and setting August 16th for an update on the DTA forecast. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Proceeding number 22AL-0348G. Mr. Acera, Mr. Davis, Atmos rate case.
Yeah, good morning, commissioners. I'm here alongside Mr. Davis to present Atmos Energy's application for RRR in its rate case. In this second round of RRR, Atmos challenges one issue, the depreciation expense adjustment. In the first round of RRR, the Commission granted UCA's challenge and concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support Atmos's proposed depreciation expense adjustment. As a result, the revenue requirement decreased by roughly $485,000. In the RRR before you, Atmos puts forth 3 reasons why the Commission should reverse course and grant its request for its proposed depreciation expense adjustment. First, it argues that the record supports its request. Second, it contends that in its 2018 rate case, a similar adjustment was made. Third, it argues that accelerated depreciation supports the Commission's policy goals and now argues that the purpose of adjusting the depreciation expense in rates would allow the company to recover its book or accounting depreciation. The easiest way to present this, I think, is to address the arguments in a bit more depth and then intersperse my recommendations if that works for you, Chair Blank.
It does.
So the crux of Atmos's first argument is that its depreciation expense adjustment is a known and measurable adjustment, just like those that are made in many rate cases. Atmos argues that because the amount of the depreciation expense is known and measurable, it makes sense to modify these figures to more accurately describe the overall cost of service. Atmos also argues that because there was testimony discussing the proposed modification and the record indicates what the amount would be, there's evidence in the record to support the proposed adjustment. There are 2 issues with this approach. First, Atmos attempts to describe the adjustment as a fully supported, known and measurable adjustment. But the Commission has ultimately agreed with the ALJ that it's not supported. The ALJ didn't reject the proposal out of hand because it didn't qualify as a potential known and measurable adjustment. Instead, the ALJ found and concluded that Atmos hadn't carried its burden with respect to the proposed approximately $1.1 million adjustment. It was 1.1 at that point. Atmos's direct and rebuttal testimony do not provide sufficient explanation, the ALJ continued, for the proposed adjustment. And that's the second issue with this proposal. In the first round of RRR, the Commission agreed with the ALJ, concluding that the record is insufficient to support a departure from using a 13-month average period in calculating the depreciation expense. In sum, the testimony and evidence in the record fell short of providing any details or analysis showing why Atmos's line item titled depreciation adjustment was calculated to the amount requested or how it's otherwise reasonable or warranted. And that same problem plagues Atmos's third issue raised on RRR, that its proposal for a year-end depreciation expense is warranted because it meets Commission policy objectives and would match higher depreciation rates with its books. However, its legal argument on this second round of RRR can't correct what the ALJ and earlier what the Commission has determined, that the record evidence doesn't explain how the depreciation amount properly satisfies those or any other objectives. So put another way, the lack of details or analysis here falls short of allowing the commission to determine whether the adjustment as proposed fulfills the purpose of adjusting the depreciation expense and rates so that the utility is recovering what is being expensed on its books as depreciation or for any other purpose. So in sum, at this point, the record evidence hasn't changed and legal argument in briefs isn't evidence. So for that reason, I recommend that you reject Atmos's first and third arguments in support of its proposed adjustment.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
as do I.
Finally, Atmos also argues that the commission should adopt its proposed depreciation expense adjustment because a similar adjustment was made in its 2018 rate case. As you all know, there's no stare decisis among PUC decisions. Each rate case is unique, and the commission makes its decision on the facts and in the context before it each time. That last rate case did see the ALJ make a similar adjustment, but the adjustment was never challenged on exceptions and the commission never considered it. Either way, that was done 5 years ago, or that it was done 5 years ago doesn't mean the commission must do the same thing in this rate case. So I recommend that for these reasons, you reject Atmos's second argument, and with that, its application for RRR.
Commissioner Plant,
Recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC motion decision denying the RRR request. So thank you, Mr. Sarah.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 22AL-0483, Black Hills TCA adjustment. Mr. Davis, Ms. Harper.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. On November 1st of last year, Black Hills Colorado Electric made its annual filing for its transmission cost adjustment, or TCA, to implement new increased TCA rates effective January 1st, 2023. Staff subsequently filed a protest asserting that Black Hills is requesting cost recovery associated with projects that are not extension or construction of transmission facilities, and as such, the costs of those projects are not eligible for recovery through the TCA pursuant to Colorado statute. Staff requested that the Commission suspend the proposed tariffs and set the matter for hearing. The Commission did suspend the 2023 TCA, and the effect was that the 2022 TCA remained in effect while this case is ongoing. The matter was then sent to an ALJ for a recommended decision. On January 18th, ALJ Aviv Segev issued his recommended decision number R230464. He finds that staff failed to provide compelling evidence to support its interpretation of the legislative intent behind Senate Bill 07100. He finds that the phrases robust electric transmission system, reliability of electric power, continued availability, reliable electricity, and continually evaluate the adequacy of electric transmission facilities in Senate Bill 100 to indicate that the legislature contemplated routine repair and replacement of transmission facilities as recoverable under the statute. The recommended decision thus rejects staff's request that routine replacement and repair of existing transmission be removed from TCA cost recovery. The LJ further rejects as unpersuasive staff's argument that the increased energy burden of ratepayers and Black Hills' changed financial circumstances since 2009 require a re-examination of recoverable transmission investments under Colorado statute. The LJ also rejects staff's three-pronged framework for determining TCA cost recovery eligibility. And turning to the specific calculation of the 2023 TCA revenue requirement, the LJ finds that all projects Black Hills included for cost recovery were made in the ordinary course of business and not requiring a CPCN, and that all amounts requested for recovery were just and reasonable. So advisors have put this matter on today's weekly meeting agenda for a discussion about whether to stay the LJ's recommended decisions. The advisors recommend that the Commission take this action out of an abundance of caution to ensure that the ALJ's decision does not become the decision of the Commission on August 7th. While it makes sense to us that the commission stay the decisions. We don't think it's necessary for the commission to extend the deadline for the filing of exceptions, which are due August 7th. And the commission should maintain the shortened response time to exceptions and require such responses to be filed no later than August 14th. So we recommend staying the decision and maintaining the deadline for exceptions and responses.
Commissioner Plant,
Yeah, I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
as do I, and I think that can be an ABC decision, staying the recommended decision and keeping the dates consistent with your recommendation. So thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 22A-0309 EG, back to the Public Service Company strategic issues. Mr. Mendelson has done this.
Great, thank you. Hello, commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory staff. I'm joined by Dan Greenberg, also of your advisory staff, and Lindsay Dundas of Commission Counsel. Public Services DSM-BE strategic issues application for the 2024-2026 period was docketed as proceeding number 22A-0309 EJ. That proceeding weighed a wide range of issues, including programmatic investments and savings targets for electric and gas energy efficiency, beneficial electrification, and demand response, performance incentive mechanisms or PIMs, measure continuance or termination, cost effectiveness parameters, discount rates, and numerous secondary matters. The deliberations took place on May 11th, 17th, and 26th, and the Commission's decision was mailed on June 22nd as decision number C230413. The applications for RRR were timely filed by the company, staff, EOC on July 12th. The company's RRR application was joined in part by SWEEP and EEBC. The array of issues raised on RRR include the company's PIM, income qualified cost effectiveness, impact of the Inflation Reduction Act or IRA, and the discount rate applied to the PIM. I'll start with the PIM and with assistance from Ms. Dundas, and Mr. Greenberg will lead on your discussion on the remaining issues. The company argues that incentive levels in the decision to not comply with statutory requirements to incentivize utilities for electric and gas DSM achievements, nor with the Commission's stated goal of maximizing net economic and other benefits to ratepayers. Overall, according to Public Services calculations, the Commission decision will likely lead to an incentive of about $16 million if the company meets its goals. The company notes that this value is significantly below incentive levels achieved by the company in 2021 and 22, and notes several specific concerns and remedy options. First, the company takes issue with the Commission's decision to remove the social cost of emissions, or SCE, from the calculation of net benefits. The company argues that including SCE in the net benefits calculation aligns its financial incentives with the societal interest in GHG emission reduction, the Commission's policy goals, and the manner in which cost effectiveness analysis are conducted. The Commission, however, found that SCE will be reflected in other proceedings, including the company's forthcoming Clean Heat Plan, which was to be filed yesterday, August 1. Specifically, the Commission said that emissions should be assessed across company activities in a holistic manner, and that there is an ongoing stakeholder process to do so, established via the company's ERP application submitted as proceeding number 21A-0141E. This will avoid the potential to double incentivize the company, the same activity or outcome, and set a bigger picture goal upon which multiple programs can be on equal footing. We also agree with staff that the Commission should incentivize actual emission reductions when possible, rather than projected emission reductions. The company seeks a reconsideration now of this aspect of the decision, arguing that one, any double incentives eventually approved could be mitigated by phasing out SCE from the PIMs in this proceeding, should the SCE be effectuated somewhere else by 2026. Two, elimination of the SCE disregards the carbon intensity or quality of the energy saved. And three, the Commission's approach omits about 60% of the net benefit, which overall reduces the incentive the company will be able to earn and results in potential earnings far below than the Commission has previously approved. So the first issue before you is whether or not to re-include SCE in the PIM calculation. I'll hand it to you to discuss and can answer any questions or provide a recommendation if desired.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first regarding the language in our prior decision excluding SCE from the PIM because of a more holistic approach elsewhere. And for me, I agree with the company's concerns that we shouldn't adjust the PIM in this case for some potential outcome in a future process. We just haven't seen the results of the stakeholder process in the ERP, and we don't know if a holistic approach will be appropriate there. And as I've said elsewhere, I do have concerns about that holistic approach. For example, there may not be $1 per ton of CO2 emissions reduced PIM structure that's going to motivate meaningful cost control on billions of dollars of utility investment while simultaneously properly rewarding company-controlled emissions reductions. To me, cost control and emission reductions may be two separate things that should perhaps be addressed in two different PIMs. Also, I don't think this holistic approach at anything like this scale has ever existed in Colorado, or to the best of my knowledge elsewhere. And, I'd just be cautious about putting too many dollars on it. And we certainly don't have a proposal for a holistic approach in front of us today. So I do agree with staff, however, and as we said in the initial order, Mr. Mendelson quoted that this commission should reward actual emission reductions rather than projected ones. So on balance, I'm still okay with leaving the social cost of emissions out of the PIM. But in this order today, I don't want to refer approvingly to a future holistic approach or prejudge something that may be in front of us in the future. As I said, I'm skeptical about the holistic approach, and we don't have the right record in front of us anyway. So I just stay away from that here, but very curious to hear your thinking. So Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this discussion that we had during this case about, the concerns of, counting carbon emissions twice. And, this is a very interlinked system, and we have a variety of incentives that cover a variety of different targets, and there's the opportunity for us to be counting carbon reductions, in a couple of different instances is pretty high. And so I think that, we were correct in, I do agree with the company. I think at some point we need to shift to our overall, outcomes-based incentive structure. But how that is structured, I think, is going to be something that we just don't have the information to make a decision on right now. And I think that, future proceedings, we've talked about doing, performance-based regulation proceeding, non-litigated proceeding, in which case this may be, one of the key measures upon which the company is compensated. I think is probably in the future, but I don't think that in this we have enough information in this specific case to allow that.
Commissioner Goman.
Yeah, I mean, I would maintain our prior determination, probably for slightly different reasons. I mean, I understand it hasn't been done before here, but I've expressed my solid preference that we attempt to look at this as holistically as possible and not make a lot of fragmented different items addressing, in essence, some of the same emissions or same targets, and also to be able to do so with actual data is a very attractive feature of potentially changing up how we've done this. Clearly, we'll see the merits of some holistic approach to come, but I worry if we fragment and make these small incentives that all address similar issues ahead of time, we somewhat intentionally undercut that effort that is to come in terms of how holistically that can be evaluated and discussed in that attempt, and I don't have any intention to do that with this decision. So I would stay the course with what we had.
Let me just ask you a question. This is a discussion for another day, but when you say holistic, do you include cost control or just environmental? For me, the part where I get concerned is when you try and put cost control on some holistic incentive. If you're just talking about a holistic incentive to promote environmental reductions, I think some of my concerns drop away. So any clarification on that, Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I benefit probably from having the ERP directive in front of me, which I don't have. But I believe what we suggested is that they look at total greenhouse gas emissions reductions as well as cost effectiveness of greenhouse gas reductions. So not that necessarily every PIM would have those linked, that could be 2 PIMs, but also how do you get most cost effectively to your greenhouse gas goals, which I think implicates a lot of the different kind of decisions and inputs that end up getting you there, cost containment on different bids, demand response, kind of putting everything in one equal playing field to say, how is the most cost effective way that you can get to that environmental result, I think is a necessary part of that. So I don't know that what we'll see is 1 PIM suggested. It may well be 2. I don't think we've in any way precluded that it could be 2. But I think there's a relationship there that's important to consider that influences company decisions in a way that I think we want to have incentivized at a fairly high level. Well,
Not to go too far afield, but just remember, we also care about performance and timing and other stuff. That's totally separate from the environmental PIM. But all right, so I think we have a 3-0 vote, Mr. Mendelson, to deny that request. And if we could potentially keep it on relatively narrow grounds about not wanting to prejudge the issue in the future, something like that. Would that be okay? Anything to add, Commissioner Plan, or on this? No. Commissioner Gilman, would that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, so long as it doesn't conflict with what we've already said on the subject. Yeah, I take it this will be a TBC anyway, so.
Yeah.
Probably gonna see it just to presume, so I'm definitely okay with it if I see it.
All right, so we'll have to see the language and we'll work it out on TBC. With that, Mr. Mendelson, and with my apologies if we went a little astray, keep going.
All right, thank you. The company states that if it is unable to convince the commission that SCE should be included in the net benefits calculation, the company respectfully urges the commission to consider a range of other modifications to at least better align the company's financial incentives with the reality of the difficulty of the efficiency targets set in the decision and statutory directives to incentivize DSM. Starting with the electric efficiency PIM, the company notes that it proposed its electric EE PIM to begin at 315 gigawatt hours of electric energy savings, or 70% of a 450 gigawatt hour goal. Instead, the commission set it at 352 gigawatt hours, or 80% of a 440 gigawatt hour goal. The company notes that this threshold of 352 gigawatt hours is particularly ambitious because, as the commission recognized, the company is losing a significant percentage of its residential savings presented by its home lighting program, although it acquiesces on the 80% threshold starting point. The company also proposed that if SCE were excluded from the net benefits calculations for PIMs, it be allowed to receive 8% of net benefits once it achieved the threshold performance level, and that its share of the benefits escalate by 3% for every 5% in achievement above the threshold level. Instead, while the commission started the net benefits sharing at 8% of the company for the company, it only allowed the PIM to be escalated at 0.5% for every 5% of additional achievement, or just 1/6 of the company's request. Overall, the company says it anticipates earning only about $9 million in electric EE incentive, or about half its 2022 incentive. The company provided a series of graphs in attachment B to its RRR application to assist the commission in comprehending the PIM function from this decision. The company now asks the commission to reconsider the electric EE-PIM slope at a 1.5% for every 5% of savings above the 80% threshold. The company also addresses the statutory provision 40-3.2.104, which I will hand over to Ms. Dundas to address briefly.
Ms. Dundas.
Thanks, commissioners. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. As Mr. Mendelson just said, the company quotes in its RRR filing, Colorado Revised Statute 40-3.2.1045, and states that the commission is statutorily required to allow the company an opportunity to have its, quote, investments in cost-effective electric DSM programs be more profitable than any other utility investment that's not already subject to special incentives. The company states in its RRR that the $78 million energy efficiency budget could be expected to return on the order of $25 to $30 million ROE, depending on many factors if it had been traditionally invested. The company, however, stopped short of seeking a PIM in that dollar range on RRR and did not, in its original request request such a high electric PIM. The company also does not explain specifically how, or if at all, the PIM approved by the commission's decision contradicts with the statute. And I just want to provide a little bit of additional context on the statute before you begin your deliberations on the electric efficiency PIM. So first, the statutory provision quoted by the company affords the commission broad discretion to comply with making DSM, quote, more profitable than other investments. The commission can use many approaches. Section 5 lists several considerations for the commission to take into account, aside from the option of allowing for an incentive with a higher rate for DSM. These include that the commission may consider allowing for depreciation for DSM investments in subpart B, retention of a portion of net economic benefits associated with DSM programs in subpart C, and allowing for the use of a cost adjustment clause for DSM program costs in subpart D, as well as any other incentive mechanism that the commission deems appropriate as a catch-all. So in sum, I don't have a recommendation or a vote to tee up, but just wanted to note that the company did not explain how or if at all there's a statutory issue with the current PIM, and also note that the language of 40-3.2.1045 affords the commission flexibility in its approach in ensuring DSM is more profitable than other investments. So with that overview, I'll turn the mic back over to Mr. Mendelson so you can frame up the discussion for the commissioners on the electric PIM.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Dundas. Now, aside from that statutory issue, the basic question before you is, does the commission agree to modify the slope of the PIM function above the 0.5% approved in the decision?
Again, I'll take a shot and see what you guys think. Although I don't think the statute somehow mandates a certain incentive level or requires that DSM needs to be equivalent to supply side resources, I am concerned that maybe we went a little too far in pushing down the incentives in our initial order. So I'd be okay increasing the escalation rate on the electric EE-PIM into the 0.75 to 1% range. Seems like this may be a little closer to our prior incentives and maybe better motivate higher levels of performance. But again, very interested in hearing where you guys are coming out. Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, so first I would say that, you know, to the company's argument about the reduction in their capabilities because of the lighting, we took that into account when we actually set the reduced targets. So the targets would have been much higher had the lighting been included. So I think we've already addressed that when we addressed the actual goal. As it relates to the slope of the incentive, you know, I would be willing to do something along the lines of what you have recommended, Mr. Chairman. Another thing maybe to take into consideration is, you know, when we have these linear sort of escalations starting at 80%, we're kind of effectively moving the goal back, right? I mean, there's no change when they actually hit the goal. And I would actually, I would prefer if it were amenable to you two, to have the inflection point at the goal. Maybe have a lower rise until they actually hit the goal, and then say, hey, you've hit the goal, you're exceeding the goal, and you get an accelerated recovery based on that kind of performance, so that the goal actually is a goal as opposed to just being a midpoint.
So just to put a concrete proposal in front of the three of us, so it'd be keep the 0.5% till they hit the goal, and then maybe jump it up to 1.5% after, something like that.
Yeah, I think
I like that. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm kind of troubled by the same thing you're troubled by. We set these goals and we act like that has some sort of operative effect, but like it doesn't really. It's just a point on the graph in this situation, because it doesn't like really change the treatment. I mean, things are centered around it, but like in essence, the goal becomes when you start getting an incentive, I think, like by default here. So I really like that concept, and I think it's an important way to recognize that. I first of all, I agree with you. We took into consideration the changes in programs as we set the goals, and I think also we're trying to be cognizant that we have several other areas now, like BE and DR, that we're trying to incentivize, and so necessarily like there might be some adjustments to these incentive structures, so we don't just essentially keep exploding the budgets and incentives available here. We have to mind the cost containment at the same time as looking at all of these diverse areas we want to incentivize. But I actually really like that idea, because it much more kind of focuses on incentives on the goal rather than just this random spot X amount before the goal being the main place to hit. So and I think we could go up to more like 1.5, like the company suggests, if it's only for that portion, after the actual 100% of the goal. So I'd be supportive of a concept that keeps it at, keeps the starting point at 8%, keeps it at 0.5% up to the 100% of the goal. And from the 100% of the goal up is the 1.5%. I think that places the emphasis on the right spot. Is we want higher performance, and it really ups the ante for higher performance. So I think that's a solid message to send, and a mathematically accurate way to do it.
Any further comments, Commissioner Plant, or keep moving?
I think we can keep moving. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas.
Sorry, can I just clarify that decision point? So is that the commission granting in part the company's RRR request, meaning that they will get 1.5% slope above 100%, but between 80 and 100%, it stays at 0.5?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now moving to the gas efficiency PIM. The company requests the commission reconsider and clarify several aspects of the gas efficiency function applied in this decision. In its application, the company requested that the gas EE-PIM start at 70% of the annual goal, where it would earn 8%, escalating 3% for every additional 5% of achievement. Instead, the commission decided on a PIM that starts at 80% of the savings, where the company will earn 6% of net benefits, escalating at 0.5% for every 5% of achievement. The company argues the decision eliminates several important tools in its gas efficiency program, including 1, retrofit market gas water heating by 2025, 2, new construction market rate incentives for gas-fired space heating, water heating, or air conditioning by 2024, and 3, mixed fuel Energy Star new homes incentives by June 30th, 2024. According to the company, had those programmatic changes been in place in 2022, the company's savings achievements would have declined from what the level it actually achieved of about 840,000 decatherms to about 616,000 decatherms based on the 2025 restrictions, and 550,000 decatherms based on the 2026 restrictions. The company contends that based on the savings targets imposed by the commission and the 80% threshold, both of these hypothetical savings levels are well below when the PIM would kick in, and that it anticipates the possibility that it may not be able to earn any incentive in 2025 or 2026 under the decision's PIM structure. The company says it's not seeking reconsideration or revision of the gas savings targets, nor of the decisions elimination of the aforementioned measures. Instead, the company says it no longer has the support of sufficient incentives, particularly because the incentives started where the starting share was reduced from 8% to 6%, a decline of 25%, and the incentive share escalation was reduced from 3% to 0.5%, a decline of 83%. Finally, the company says the decision fails to identify the threshold level of achievement upon which the company will begin earning a gas efficiency PIM. The company requests now that the gas efficiency PIM should start at 8% of net economic benefits without SCE and escalate by 1.5% for every 5% goal achieved above that 80% threshold. As mentioned before, the company graphed the PIM function in its attachment B to its RRR application, and the commission has an executable version of that by which it can assess alternative structures. So the decision before you now is whether to modify the company's starting share of net economic benefits to be received or the slope of the line once the PIM threshold is reached. I'll pause here for your discussion.
Or Plant. I think I'd rather hear your thoughts before sharing mine.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what your two thoughts are on this. I mean, I think this is another case where we're looking at, we're looking at it within a very small focus on these technologies, but I think we were actually pretty robust in our efforts to advance beneficial electrification, which of course is going to impact the same market, and it's someplace where we really, I think, appropriately made our focus. And so, I think the company is, saying you're not giving us enough money for having high efficiency improvements in our gas side, but my counter would be that we're giving really robust incentives over on the beneficial electrification side. Yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this as well.
So just to be clear, you're proposing to deny the request.
That's my initial inclination, but I'd like to hear your comments too.
Commissioner Gilman?
Sorry, just studying the graphs, the numbers, trying to figure out if we can remedy a similar problem to what we just discussed on the electric side, that in essence, the goal just floats in the middle of this graph and there's no magic about the goal here at all, like in terms of the PIM structure. So probably, I agree with you. I think this is a little more aggressive. And of course, there's the limit that several proposals get, right, to the limit in terms of incentives that the companies put forth. I mean, there's potentially an avenue here to be a bit more generous, essentially following the same type of movement that we just did on the electric, in terms of making a bit of an inflection point of the line at the goal to just increase the steepness a little bit, slope. After that, I wouldn't be down for much more significant changes than that, but I think that's a potential and could align it with our concerns we just discussed, as well as how we're going to move the electric one.
So what's the proposal on the table? Keep the slope at 0.5% till we hit the target, and then maybe jump to 1% after the target's hit, just to show a little less excitement for this particular set of programs? Or do you guys have an alternative thought about what we might do? Commissioner Plant, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be amenable to that. I think that, this is a part of our overall sort of strategy of moving more towards incentives on BE, and recognizing that this is a sort of a transition spot that we're in. But yeah, I think, having the goal be an actual goal and having a reaction to the incentive at the goal would be a good thing to do. I'd also, I mean, in the future, just parenthetically, in the future, I'd love to see us be able to distinguish between, weatherization investment efficiency increases versus, higher efficiency furnaces or, things of that nature, which is, one we want to continue and one we're kind of starting to move away from. But we don't really distinguish in this proceeding on those. So I'd love to see us be able to distinguish somehow in the future.
So I guess I'd be happy to put some language in this order requesting the parties work on that distinction between, building envelope and weatherization improvements and versus high efficiency gas appliances that may over time, turn into some form of load building. I don't know. But I'd flag that issue in the order. Commissioner Gilman, any thoughts on either the numbers or the distinction between, high efficiency appliances and building envelope weatherization stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to be responsive to the last point first, I mean, given our direction that I think significantly limits incentives around equipment specifically, indicating also a phase out of essentially all gas-fired equipment incentives by the end of this strategic issues period. I just don't know how important it is to now see that distinction. Like, I think it's helpful. It would have been helpful for all these years and previously. But I mean, since we're essentially on a path to sunset that, we don't see that specific decision point represented in RRR. I don't want to make them do a bunch of extra work on something we've already said we should sunset. So like, it's interesting. I just don't know if I'd place a lot of emphasis there right now, given where we're going strategically as an outcome of this proceeding. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so what it is it'll just be a statement of future intent or a future policy preference by the commission without a request for any analysis or work or something like that.
I think that's fine. I just want to recognize if it's
already
phasing out,
implicit,
I don't
yeah.
need to require a bunch of extra work about something we've said should phase out, basically. Okay, back to the numbers. I think that's what I was on next. Yeah, I'd be okay with going to a 1% after the 100%. I think it's important. I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Plant said, but also would just point out it's really important to continue to emphasize the building shell improvements that occur under the gas EE program. Those are valuable no matter what heating source someone's on. And they're also incredibly valuable if those people ends up electrifying, because you're talking about, peak electric capacity, which is something that comes up in terms of the discussions for electrification. So like those are valuable no matter what. And so I want to be sure we're continuing to give the signal that these reductions are important, especially as they occur on the building envelope. So, yeah, I'd be okay going to a 1% after the 100% threshold to just indicate our willingness to provide additional benefits to the company when they achieve very high levels of savings.
I think that's a decision. Does that give you what you need to write the order on this section, Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas?
Yes, it does, from my standpoint. Okay, the last decision on the PIM area is the overall PIM cap. The company proposed an overall PIM cap of $35 million and a DR specific cap of $10 million. Public Service argues that a $35 million value is reasonable because it would represent only 0.7% of total annual electric and gas revenues of $5.1 billion. Public Service contends in its RRR that since DR was set aside by the Commission's decision, a $25 million cap seems appropriate. The Commission set a combined cap on electric EE, gas EE, and BE of $18 million, $22 million, and $25 million for 2024, 25, and 26, respectively. The company notes that the 2024 and 2025 caps would be 24% and 7% less than the 23.7% that the company earns in total incentives in 2021. Company contends the resulting message, whether intended or not, is that energy efficiency and beneficial electrification are not priorities for the commission and should not be for the company. Company believes that such result is out of sync with the commission's and the state's energy and climate policies and statutory mandates around energy efficiency. Company therefore requests that the commission reconsider these overall PIM caps and set a $25 million PIM cap for all years covered by the strategic issues proceeding. So the decision before you now is whether to revise the overall PIM cap for 1 or more years.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I think, you know, in looking at the numbers that were provided by the company, I think that an adjustment maybe is in order. I think 25 per year is maybe a little rich. Yeah, I think that we could adjust our at least initial years. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I think we're at what, 18 and a half for the first year.
Yeah, it's 18 in the first year. So I just throw some numbers out there for you guys to consider. What about 20 million in 2024 and 22 or 23 million in 25 and just leaving it at 25 million in 26. So but I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, where are you at?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to go to 20 million in 2024, maybe 22 and a half in 2025, and then leave 2026. I think it's important. I mean, an argument for 25 million. Sorry, I thought I had cured my eye, and now it's like really burning and bothering me. An argument for 25 million across the board, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not proportional. The BE expenditure is growing significantly every year. So it's like the basis is so off in a ratio to what the bonus would be to keep the bonus consistent. It just, I can't make it make sense to hold it consistent. But I think to our prior discussions on trying to really incentivize and encourage the company to get above the 100% goals, we've made some more headroom in those individual ones by increasing the slope after that inflection point. That it's important to give a little more headroom here so that I've seen these things work weird in the past where you hit a cap sometimes before 100%. So it's just important to think of the relationship of the total cap to those individuals. So that's why I think giving a little more headroom here in the 20 million and then 22.5 million in the respective first years, keeping 25 million. I mean, I think some of the arguments here that, because they want a couple more million, it looks like the commission doesn't care about energy efficiency. I think that's a little tough to take in terms of a comment. Just throw that out there. But I think giving a little more headroom here would be helpful considering the other decision points.
I guess before we didn't care and now we do. So
it would be helpful if we kept the arguments to things that were a little more on focus here.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I support that. So I think what you're suggesting is 20, 22 and a half, and then leave the other. Yeah, I think I support that.
All right, Mr. Mendelson.
Great, thank you. I'll pass it over now to Mr. Greenberg.
Good morning, commissioners. This next issue concerns a requirement found in paragraph 143 of decision C-230413 that projects that projects funded by the company's income qualified program be evaluated to be cost effective. In its testimony and statement of position, Energy Outreach Colorado asked the commission to direct public service to cease subjecting measures and projects considered in its IQ programs to a cost effectiveness screen, given that Rule 4753I1 specifically allows utilities to propose IQ programs with TRC value, total resource cost values less than 1. In paragraph 143 of the decision, the commission found that given the enormous disparity between need estimated by the company at $3.6 billion and available budget for IQ programming about $10 million annually, the company would need to continue to require projects in its IQ programs to achieve a minimum TRC value of 1 in order to better allocate scarce IQ program funding. This finding is challenged in RRR filings by both EOC and by the company. EOC argues that the directives of paragraph 143, 1, would abrogate longstanding commission leniency regarding cost effectiveness in IQ programming. 2, would not direct IQ funding to more cost-effective projects. 3, will reduce opportunities for deep savings used by the most vulnerable IQ customers. And 4, fails to acknowledge the increasing need for energy assistance that EOC and other agencies provide. EOC asked the Commission to allow the company and EOC flexibility to complete a limited number of IQ projects that are not cost effective, or in the alternative, EOC requests that the Commission revisit this issue in future DSM and BE plan filings so that the company, stakeholders, and the Commission can take a more inclusive look at cost effectiveness beyond the TRC, since current cost effectiveness testing ignores the impacts of funds from state, federal, and philanthropic sources. Public service states that paragraph 143 of the decision would have a detrimental impact on some of the company's most vulnerable customers and undermine the company's ability to comply with other provisions of the decision regarding IQ programming. The company notes the inconsistency of paragraph 143 with Commission precedent and Rule 4753. Further, the company claims that it and EOC have kept IQ programming cost effective in the aggregate, that it has established a history of delivering quality IQ programming, and that there's no need for an additional heightened requirement. The company urges the Commission to remove the requirement set forth in paragraph 143. Advisors note that despite the incorporation of the social costs of both carbon and methane into cost effectiveness calculations, IQ programs continue to enjoy the 50% non-energy benefit adder that has boosted IQ cost effectiveness for many years. Thus, the Commission's policy regarding cost effectiveness has been and remains quite lenient when it comes to IQ programs. Furthermore, the record in this proceeding indicates that significant IQ program funds have been spent on activities having nothing to do with energy savings, such as remediation of excess clutter and hoarding and integrated pest management. Expenditures such as these provide no benefits to non-participating ratepayers and significantly degrade program and project cost effectiveness. So the decision for you is whether to 1, retract paragraph 143 directives regarding project cost effectiveness, 2, retain paragraph 143 as is, or 3, delay implementation of paragraph 143 directive and require that this issue be further litigated in the company's upcoming DSM plan proceeding. I'll pause here for your discussion.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the argument. I think that the Commission maintaining the TRC of 1.0, I think is justified with the disparity in the need and the available funds. But I also am sympathetic to the argument that EOC brings up about the third-party contributions, the IRA incentives, which are heavily targeted at IQ customers. I think that should absolutely play a role in that calculation, and currently it doesn't. We've talked about this within the proceeding for the general population, which I think we're going to just get some information from the company as it relates to that. But while I don't feel like we have maybe enough of an evidentiary record to rule on this for IQ customers, I would encourage EOC to maybe bring forward what a backing out of the third party and the IRA incentives would do, what the impact would be to the IQ program. I think that one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that when the customers that we're talking about have a very high energy burden. So the amount that we can reduce that energy burden, it actually is going to have a much greater impact. for these customers. And so anything that we can do in order to make that a more effective program, I think is appropriate. So I would maintain our, my inclination would be to maintain our decision, but to ask EOC to address those issues of third party and IRA in there as a component of the MTRC in their next plan filing.
Commissioner Gilman.
Well, I probably have a lot of the same thoughts as Commissioner Plant. I was probably going to go a slightly different direction and just say, let's delay implementation and have this addressed in full in the next DSM plan. Because a lot of kind of the questions you brought up just mean to me, like, we're not done litigating this. We don't have the record. We don't understand all the implications well enough. And I think there's a significant amount of confusion. I mean, they refer repeatedly to Rule 4753, which is at the measure level or at the program level, I think. But here we're talking about projects. So it has gotten quite confusing to me in this record. You know, I see projects and programs as distinct things, yet it's confused constantly in this record from what I can see. And so to me, I mean, the crux of this issue is we're trying to very intentionally and significantly continue to increase funding and opportunities for income qualified programs and really place more emphasis, more dollars in that bucket. And as you pointed out, and Mr. Greenberg, that despite our efforts, the need still far outweighs the money that's available. And so the more dollars that are at stake, the higher the need is, the more incumbent it is upon us to ensure that those dollars are being spent as strategically and as well as possible to serve not only the IQ customers receiving the services, but also the entire rate base as a whole, ensuring we're essentially getting the best results possible for their money being spent on these efforts. And I think what this whole controversy points out is there's probably some room here to improve, or at least to clarify how this works, how we're prioritizing the need here and ensuring that we're addressing the need as best we can, understanding that's a really dynamic thing. You know, there's the personal need of the people who require the assistance, but then there's also kind of the cost effectiveness from a system level. And I think the answer is we have to figure out how to look at both. You know, we have to figure out how to ensure that we have a good idea how these things are prioritized. And I think get a higher comfort level that all of this has been considered in a way that's really strategic and meaningful, you know, and have a lot of confidence with that moving forward. So to me, they're fairly decently sized questions. And so it seems best dealt with in the next DSM plan filing, where we can really have it litigated, because I just found some confusion in the record here. So that would be my inclination on how to go.
So just so I'm clear, so
Chair Blank, I'm afraid you've frozen.
so just clarifying question. So you're thinking in the 2025 or the 20, so we won't try and stop anything in 2024, but maybe in the 2025 plan, we'll ask that the parties provide, I guess it's, I don't even know whether it's quite a utility cost test, but it would be, call it a modified TRC that includes the state, federal, and nonprofit dollars as part of the cost effectiveness analysis. So we wouldn't wait till the next strategic issues case. We deal with it.
The next plan filing.
And when's the next plan filing? Is that for 2024 or 2025? Do you know, Mr. Greenberg?
Yeah, it's for 2024, and we expect that it would be filed in the fairly near future.
Does that seem too soon to you to get this framed up for litigation, or Commissioner Plant?
No, I don't think it's too soon. I think, you know, what we're doing essentially is saying we still want a 1.0 MTRC for IQ, but we're open to, you know, seeing how that MTRC might be modified to include you know, these third-party contributions, the IRA contributions, all those pieces that we aren't currently counting. You know, we're not saying in this SI, you're going to take them out. We're just saying that's something to, you know, bring in the next DSM filing, plan filing, so that, you know, we can evaluate it, but we would still maintain the 1.0.
All right, so it's like an M squared TRC test. It's a modified TRC, and I can support Commissioner Gilman's request to do it in the DSM 2024 DSM plan filing. Before we move on, just one other thing to bounce off you guys. On this record, company witness Mr. Schoenheider, in his supplemental direct testimony attachment MRS-4 at page 1, showed that something like 400,000 customers could be considered income qualified. And that doesn't even include DI community customers or income burden customers that are almost certainly additive to that $400,000 number. It just seems like a huge number to me. And I'm wondering if you guys would be open in this order, you know, to asking the company, again, maybe as soon as the 2024 DSM plan filing, to see if there's ways to better target the need to the most vulnerable customers, which I think they already know through their, you know, propensity to pay models and through their disconnect and arrearage and telephone models, who they are. So do you have any thoughts about trying to put some additional language along those lines? I just worry when you're trying to provide benefits to 400,000 customers, it just, you know, you end up targeting the most sophisticated, easiest to reach, and, you know, systematically maybe exclude the most vulnerable. So any thoughts on that, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to have them address that. I mean, the IRA, you know, in some aspects kind of does that, because you get higher incentives as you're, you know, as you have lower income. And then as you get to 80% or, you know, whatever it might be, you know, the incentive goes down, but it's still there. And so in that way, they're trying to prioritize through the financial incentives, you know, those highest need and lowest income customers. So, you know, having the company address how we might reflect that in our programs, I think would be appropriate.
Commissioner Goldman?
Yeah, I would just note that in the main deliberations, which felt more recent, I couldn't believe y'all said May, but anyway, in the final deliberations on this, we reviewed kind of, remember that tiered structure of EOC to, you know, because a lot of this gets far more complicated, because now you not only have IQ customers, but disproportionately impacted communities, and are the benefits being provided, or the programs, or the incentive levels always the same? And so there's just a lot of complication around this issue at this point in terms of everything from what are the incentive levels, what programs are being offered and to who, how are you targeting it? And then I think the question you're asking is even more detailed, even within one of those buckets, potentially, like say if the tiered system were approved, how do you then differentiate who has the most need in that bucket? That's probably a step further than we're even at right now in terms of, so if I'm remembering correctly from May, it sounds like, we had asked EOC and the company to work on that sort of structure, that kind of tier that they proposed, saying, we don't think it's quite ready, but we like the idea of moving forward with this. So I think, Mr. Greenberg, correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, now this is getting into some random trivia, but like, I think we're gonna see that in the next plan filing. And so I think what you're asking is just like even a little more detailed look. So perhaps verbally just works, because I know this wasn't in the RRR, to just when they're coming up with that tiered structure, any more insights as to like how they can prioritize. And because to me, that is very much what's implied here is like, how are we prioritizing the money we have available to ensure it's helping the people, A, who need it most, and B, like ensuring there is some system benefit, some, way of viewing this. So I just wanted to point to that effort we already have and say, this is probably a tangent of that that's already going to be done or done to some degree.
I appreciate that linkage and would be happy to see the order drafted that way. I just say, I'm really concerned, if there's 400,000 income qualified customers, we're adding DI community customers on top of that. It's just so broad that, a more focused effort, on something like the 1,500 customers that got disconnected in whatever April, really could add a lot of value and focus. So appreciate the support. I don't know, Commissioner Plant, anything additional on this? Mr. Greenberg, you want to go to the IRA?
Yeah. This next issue regards the impact of federal rebates and tax credits for certain energy efficiency and beneficial electrification measures under the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. Before I go on, Ms. Dundas, was there something you needed to say?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Mr. Greenberg. I just wanted to confirm that we've all reached the same decision point on that last one. So the order will state that this is modifications to the cost effectiveness test will be something we expect analyzed in the next DSM plan filing. And then I believe I heard Commissioner Gilman say that she didn't want to make a finding on the cost effectiveness of the IQ programs now about whether they should be above 1 or not. But then I believe I heard Commissioner Plant say the opposite. So could we just confirm whether we're retracting paragraph 143 or not?
We're not. So it
Okay.
stands in effect till now, but we're asking the parties in the next DSM plan filing to provide data that includes those additional funds, federal, state, nonprofits, into call it a modified TRC test. They'll present both those tests, and we'll see if we want to move away from the single modified TRC at the time of the next plan filing. So that's
Okay.
my understanding of what we discussed. Commissioner Gilman, can you let us know if you agree,
Yeah.
disagree, or would say?
I think I was the cause of Ms. Dundas's confusion. I think my first preference would be to I don't know what the right term. I don't know if we're rescinding the paragraph, but essentially not enforce that until this is litigated. I mean, I do find the record fairly confusing, to be honest with you. The difference in conflation between programs and projects and measures is quite confusing. So it might be a hair far for me to say that we keep the finding. I think this would just be served well from actually fully litigating this issue and getting a much better record on it in the next plan filing.
I'm not prepared to support the elimination of that TRC test as currently structured. I'm just the definition of who has access to it seems too broad to me, and I just am concerned about accountability once you eliminate it. So I'm not prepared to go there. So I guess Commissioner Plant, you get to decide.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's good to have a standard. But I do think that, a consideration of what's included in that determination of cost effectiveness is really important, particularly in the IQ population, because I mean, we honestly, some of the IRA incentives cover, up to 100% of the cost if it's 50% of AMI. I mean, that's something that if we just discount that, we don't consider that. I think we're doing it at our own peril. So
I have a question. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm so bad at that. If we keep the paragraph, but acknowledge that there are very significant issues with the IRA, whereas the IRA money is game changing in terms of low income percentage paid, essentially for the interim, until we litigate the next plan filing, we're effectively saying you can't count any of that. Like that's how the MTRC works right now. So in the interim, it would be enforced, you know, fairly strictly without any of that outside money. So I think that's part of my concern about like, is that really the appropriate way to deal with this?
Well, that's, I think, what we're talking about putting in place in the next DSM filing is having them back out or propose to us what would happen if they backed out both IRA incentives and their third-party donations from the calculation of cost effectiveness, so that then you actually get a true evaluation of what is the actual cost to ratepayers to provide these services versus the benefits.
And I'm totally on board with that. I'm
Yeah.
just worrying in the interim, are we setting up or essentially saying it's this standard that's far higher, the MTRC as it exists now, in the interim until that issue is litigated when we recognize some significant shortcomings.
Why don't we go to the IRA discussion, get that on the table, see what we want to do there, which is for me probably the same thing we just did here, and then why don't we cycle back and have a final discussion once the IRA issues are on the table. Would that work for you, Commissioner Gilman?
Okay,
Mr.
very well.
Greenberg?
So returning to the impact of the IRA on measure cost effectiveness. Paragraph 126 of the decision directs Public Service to present an additional cost effectiveness test in its next DSM plan filing, in which subsidies provided by the IRA are excluded from measure costs. The last sentence of paragraph 126 reads, "In the next DSM plan filing, we would also like to be made aware if there are any measures that did not meet the cost effectiveness threshold, which would have met that threshold had the IRA incentives been included in the calculation." In its RRR, Public Service takes issue with that directive in the last sentence, stating that it does not, last sentence of paragraph 126, stating that it does not apply cost effectiveness tests at the measure level, and that it has concerns about the clarity and workability of this directive, the efforts it might take to comply, and the uncertainty in the results in attempting to comply. Public Service notes that the IRA incentive for a specific customer varies based on the customer's income, tax liability, and measures he or she installs. Because of this variability, the company states that it is unable to provide an overarching assessment of the impact of IRA incentives on measure cost effectiveness, and it asks the Commission to remove this directive from paragraph 126. I'll pause here for your discussion or can provide a recommendation.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to hear the recommendation. I don't think this is outside of the capabilities of the company. I mean, I think, you have for example, 30% tax credit. You can evaluate what the consideration of that tax credit would do to the cost effectiveness calculation of various different incentives. I don't think this is specifically difficult for them to do, but be happy to hear the comments.
And would you assume that all customers can efficiently use that tax credit half, or you think we just want to see the, call it modified?
Yeah, I mean, you froze up there, Mr. Chairman, but yeah, I think we can assume that everybody can participate in that, because there are direct pay provisions that are available to those that are providing the service. And so we should be able to monetize the 30% benefit, and and then as we noted, for income qualified, there are obviously additional benefits on top of that. So I think that we can get a general, what we're trying to do with this information is to get a general idea of what it is we're leaving on the table, what it is that we're not pursuing that we could pursue in a cost-effective way for ratepayers if we consider this outside money that's coming in. And I haven't seen any evidence that they can't do that or that would be, difficult.
I'll turn it over to Commissioner Gilman in a second, but the proposal is to do whatever, a modified TRC cost test that assumes every customer can benefit from the 30% rebate or direct pay, and that for income qualified customers below 80% of area median income, they'd have 100% of the measure cost rebate. And for those between 80 and 150, there'd be a 50% rebate. So we'd have 3 modified TRC cost tests along those lines, something like that. Is that a fair description of the proposal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's different things for different, measures, but they can, work they don't have a difficulty in determining what the cost of the measures are when they put them into the overall program. So I think that, you can just take these incentives for the various different measures, add them in, subtract them from the costs, and run the measures again and see, what happens. Do things fall away that would have otherwise qualified? I don't think that that's a difficult thing to do.
Commissioner Gilman.
Thanks. Mr. Greenberg, I'm just curious, as far as your recommendation, are there areas we haven't discussed or considered as far as kind of the modeling inputs and parameters to put around this to best frame this for the company?
The one thing I would point out is that the IRA also provides some subsidies up to certain maximum values for electrical upgrades. So it's not just the heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, but also in many cases when you do those upgrades, you have to upgrade the electrical service, and there are some subsidies for low and moderate income customers to subsidize that cost as well. So we ought to incorporate that into whatever decision you make.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't see why this can't be done. So I certainly agree with you, Commissioner Plant. I think we should see the company do it. And, I understand they haven't done it this way in the past, but we haven't had the IRA in the past. So we're kind of having to evaluate how to deal with this the first time. And I think it provides an important lens to ensure that we are not just kind of have blinders on to everything else going around that clearly could have some impact on people's ability to pay or participate in energy efficiency programs that they may not have had before that outside money, federal money was available. So I think this kind of properly sets the stage and gives the commission more information upon which to consider a lot of these things in the next plan filing. So I would support moving forward with this request and giving kind of some of the clarity that was discussed today.
All right, I agree with all that as well. And I guess on this record, I'm still not ready to eliminate the requirement of having the modified TRC pass test until we can sort of litigate the 2024 DSM plan. I'll turn it over back to Commissioner Plant, but anything you'd add or want to say?
No, I think this just had to do with reporting back to us. So it wouldn't change the actual test at all.
Commissioner Gilman, anything else you want to say in regard to, now that we've discussed the IRA, anything else you want to add on the TRC test at 1? And I don't know if you want a footnote or you want to dissent on that or what you'd like to do.
Okay, so on the measure cost effectiveness, this is already gonna occur in the next plan filing, right, Mr. Greenberg? Like, that's when we'll see all this take effect.
Yeah, correct. I think what Chair Blank is asking about is the treatment of income qualified projects prior to that decision in the next plan filing.
Correct.
Yeah, I think a footnote dissent is fine. I worry about implementing something when we know there are fairly significant shortcomings of the approach.
Okay. Ms. Dundas?
I'm sorry to keep them again, but to clarify this, so we're going to deny public services request to retract paragraph 143. That's a 2-1 vote. And then we have a 3-0 vote to grant in part EOC's RRR, which is that we reevaluate the MTRC test as appropriate, litigate that issue in the next DSF plan filing.
Yeah, both in regard to federal, state, and nonprofit support for low-income measures and in regard to the IRA incentives.
Thank you.
Shall I continue then?
Please.
All right, these next two issues are brief. The first regards the discount rate to be used in the calculation of net economic benefits to be used in the determination of the company's performance incentive. Paragraph 115 of the decision directs the company to calculate program and portfolio cost effectiveness using two different discount rates, the company's weighted average cost of capital and 2.5%, with the latter rate being used primarily for informational purposes. In its RRR filing, staff asked for clarification on the discount rate that should be used when calculating the company's PIM. I can pause here for your discussion or provide a recommendation.
No, why don't you, if you could give your recommendation, that'd be great.
Sure. Advisors recommend clarifying in the RRR decision that PIM calculations will determine net economic benefits using the company's WACC as the discount rate.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Is this the one where there's it's a split? It's 2.5 for operation and WACC for yeah. Yeah, that sounds fine.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I.
Great. And in the final issue regards the disincentive offset for electric DSM. In its RRR filing, staff asked for clarification on whether the commission eliminated the company's disincentive offset for electric DSM. In its direct and rebuttal case, the company proposed eliminating the disincentive offset. Staff states that it supported the request and no party opposed it, but that in the decision does not explicitly state that the commission has eliminated the disincentive offset as part of the overall financial incentive package. Advisors recommend that the commission clarify in the RRR decision that the disincentive offset for electric DSM was eliminated.
Commissioner Plant?
I support that.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
As do I. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. And I think Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas, I think I'd like to request this be a TBC decision, unless Commissioner Gilman or Commissioner Plant see it any other way. I think Commissioner Gilman, you were right. So anything else on this, Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas?
No, not from my end. Thank you.
TBC, it sounds good. I just want to remind us that we have the 8/11 RRR deadline. So as long as everyone will be available to review early this week.
Say again, you sort of faded out there, Ms. Dundas.
I was just saying that TBC is fine, but we do have the 8/11 deadline because this is a RRR decision. So you have to commit to reviewing it early in the week next week.
If you can get us the decision quick, I think we'll do our best. Thank you. Why don't we take like a 7-minute break till 11:05, and we'll come back with 23A-0242, the Public Service Company TAP. So let's take a break till 11:05. All right, proceeding number 23A-0242E, the Public Service Company, TEP, Mr. Eden, Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, good morning again, commissioners. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory staff, and this time Senior Assistant Attorney General Aaron McLaughlin will be helping with the presentation. There are several procedural matters before you today in this proceeding, including setting a procedural schedule and hearing procedures, as well as deliberating on the pending motion for extraordinary protection that Public Service Company of Colorado filed on July 25th, 2023. I'll tee up your discussion on the procedural schedules and related matters before turning it over to Ms. McLaughlin for her presentation of the motion for extraordinary protection. So back on July 7th, 2023, the Commission issued a decision directing Public Service to confer with the parties and file a procedural schedule by July 11th, 2023. Consistent with this directive, on July 11th, Public Service filed an unopposed procedural schedule. I won't go through every deadline in the proposed schedule, but I'll note that the deadline for answer testimony is September 29th, the settlement deadline is December 13th, and the witness list and cross-examination matrix is due on January 4th, 2024. In addition, the parties propose a 10-day evidentiary hearing, which would take place January 10th through the 12th, 16th through the 19th, and the 22nd through the 24th. The company acknowledges that a hearing in January will make it difficult for the Commission to render a final decision during the 250-day timeline, but notes that multiple parties take the position that the Commission should find, pursuant to Section 40-6-109.5, subsection 4, that extraordinary conditions exist and extend the statutory timeline for an additional 130 days. Finally, along with the unopposed procedural schedule, Public Service proposes that discovery procedures be governed by Commission Rule 1405. So as you can see, the main issue here is the proposed procedural schedule and dates for the evidentiary hearing. However, these decision points entail other issues, including the statutory deadline and discovery procedures. We have a brief two-part recommendation on how to proceed, but I'll stop first for any questions or your discussion.
If you could give us your recommendation, that'd be great.
Thank you. First, advisors recommend that the Commission adopt the unopposed procedural deadlines with one modification. In order to have more time to discuss the hearing schedule, we recommend that the Commission move the deadline for the witness list and cross-examination matrix from January 4, 2024 to December 29, 2023. Advisors recommend that the Commission schedule a remote en banc evidentiary hearing for January 10th through the 12th, 16th through the 19th, and 22nd through the 24th, consistent with the parties' proposal. As part of setting the evidentiary hearing, advisors suggest that the Commission establish its typical requirements for participating in remote hearings and marking and presenting electronic exhibits. The requirements for hearing exhibits include formatting requirements, modifying and correcting previously filed hearing exhibits, and procedures for filing confidential exhibits. Regarding discovery procedures, we recommend that the Commission clarify that the procedures set forth in Rule 1405 govern discovery in this proceeding. Turning to the statutory deadline for a decision, advisors suggest that the Commission defer deciding whether extraordinary conditions exist in this proceeding until a later date if it's necessary. But we recommend set a deadline of August 17th, 2023 for any party to file an objection to such a finding of extraordinary conditions. While taking up the issue of extraordinary conditions at this stage in the proceeding is unnecessary, advisors do recommend that the Commission find that the additional time permitted in Section 40-6-109.5, subpart 1 is required and extend the decision deadline by the permitted 130 days. I'll pause here for your vote on the first part of our recommendations today and whether you agree to adopt the procedural schedule with the minor modification, set hearing dates, extend the decision deadline, and establish hearing and discovery procedures.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I.
Thank you. At this point, I'll turn it over to Ms. McLaughlin to present the second part of our recommendation regarding the pending motion for extraordinary protection and whether to refer certain matters going forward to an administrative law judge.
Thank you, Mr. Eden, and I'll get right to it and include my recommendations if that's all right, Chair. On July 25th, Public Service filed an unopposed second motion for extraordinary protection of highly confidential information. The company requests extraordinary protections for two categories of information: personal information and customer data, and also certain commercially sensitive and proprietary third-party vendor information. Public Service states that the ordinary confidential protections are insufficient for these types of data and requests that this information be restricted to commissioners, any ALJ assigned, advisory staff and attorneys, trial staff and its attorneys, and UCA and its attorneys. Public Service states that these protections are consistent with prior practice regarding similar sensitive information, and that no party has indicated opposition, and the motion is unopposed. Under Rule 1101B sub 4, and consistent with past practice, we do agree that the company shows good cause for extraordinary protections in this unopposed motion. We recommend granting the motion here. In addition, we do recommend referring all future motions for extraordinary protection and any future discovery disputes to an ALJ.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
looks like your eye's getting better, maybe.
Minute by minute. I think so. I got soap in it this morning and it just can't get better. Thanks.
Well, it looks better from here. I agree as well. And that could be an ABC decision, granting the motion for extraordinary protection and setting the procedural schedule consistent with Mr. Eden's recommendation. So thanks to the both of you. Proceeding number 23D0371E, Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Davis, Denver, City of Denver's declaratory order request on our community solar garden program.
Yes, Commissioner. So on this one, on July 17th, Denver filed a petition seeking declaratory order requesting direction on the application of a renewable energy certificate multiplier for community-based projects to Public Service's Solar Rewards Community Incentives under the 2020-2021 Renewable Energy Compliance Plan. Denver represents that it needs clarification regarding the application of the standard offer community-based projects RECs in compliance with recommended decision R20-0099. Public Service did provide a filing noting that it agrees with Denver that a controversy exists and that it can address its positions more fully if the filing is accepted and a briefing schedule is established once interventions conclude. The initial question for the Commission today is whether to accept this petition and establish a notice and intervention period, and I can move to that recommendation unless there are questions.
Please.
So under your Rule 1304, the Commission may entertain a petition for declaratory order to terminate a controversy or remove uncertainty regarding any tariff, statute, or Commission rule, regulation, or order. I recommend here accepting this petition and establishing a 30-day notice and intervention period. As presented, the petition raises a narrow question that, if resolved, would remove uncertainty regarding the cited recommended decision. In addition, we do believe that this targeted issue is one that is well suited for disposition before an ALJ. And if you agree to accept the petition, we suggest that the order today, accepting and noticing the matter, could also refer the matter for recommended decision.
Commissioner Plant,
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC decision, accepting the petition, setting response time, and referring it to an ALJ. So thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Dr. Fishaber, opening a new rulemaking on gas pipeline safety.
Well, not quite yet. But I am Pam Fishhaber, this morning coming to you in my roles as the Deputy Director of Public Safety and the Interim Deputy Director of Fixed Utilities. This morning, I would like to discuss with the commissioners 3 different matters pertaining to the existing and upcoming rulemakings that are planned for the Part 11 Pipeline Safety Program rules. The first matter is in regard to the current rulemaking with ALJ Farley to implement the requirements of Senate Bill 21-108 in proceeding 22R0491 GPS. This rulemaking was opened November 7th of 2022, and it was started to address the legislative declaration and rule change outlined in Senate Bill 108, which will strengthen and streamline Colorado's laws governing pipeline safety to meet the emerging challenges in Colorado. 2, to update the rules to incorporate the May 16th, 2022 and October 5th, 2022 effective changes to 49 CFR Parts 190 through 199, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration rules. And then 3, to incorporate changes made to Section 9-1.5-105 of CRS that requires an update to the Utility Notification Center of Colorado, or Colorado 811 membership requirements. The rulemaking is also correcting some inadvertent errors and typographical errors from the previous PSP rulemaking, where all of the rules were moved from Part 4 into Part 11. ALJ Farley does have one last public comment hearing scheduled for tomorrow, primarily to discuss mapping and the data requirement information that was brought into the rulemaking by the Colorado Energy Office as requested by the Commission, and they brought that in toward the end of the rulemaking. Once ALJ Farley receives final comments regarding mapping, a recommended decision for the Senate Bill 108 rules will be forthcoming to the Commission shortly. Our understanding is possibly within a matter of weeks, so that we can finish the rulemaking and enact the 2021 legislative session laws. Another issue that came and has been amplified toward the end of ALJ Farley's rulemaking involves advanced leak detection technology. The proposed rules noticed by the Commission included a general definition for what constitutes advanced leak detection technology. Since the Commission began this rulemaking, PHMSA has issued a notice of proposed rulemaking on their own for gas pipeline leak detection and repair that's published in the Federal Register on May 18th of 2023. Additionally, there have been some rulemaking commenters that have offered proposed red lines regarding leak detection and repair, which brings me to the second matter for discussion this morning. Do you have any questions so far, or should I keep going?
Yeah, why don't you keep going and then we'll come back and just open the whole thing up.
Okay, sounds good. The issue of the gas pipeline leak detection and repair are important issues that we need to have an in-depth discussion with all the stakeholders about. The proposed red lines that have been offered by commenters in the Senate Bill 108 rulemaking are a good starting point for discussion. However, the discussion needs to go more into depth, and it should include the commissioners as part of those initial discussions, separate from Senate Bill 108 rulemaking, so that all of the affected stakeholders can be part of the initial conversation, and so that the Commission can get the necessary input and comments prior to starting a rulemaking on these issues. In addition, the gas pipeline leak detection and repair, the PHMSA rulemaking has a significant discussion of environmental issues that can be a result of gas pipeline leakage. Our conversations with the stakeholders should include this issue as part of the discussion. Staff has started thinking through options to move forward with these discussions in preparation of drafting rules on these issues and starting a separate notice of proposed rulemaking for these issues. It will also allow us to follow the PHMSA rulemaking and review comments to get a feel of where the commenters are going on these issues as well, so that we can incorporate the information in this future rulemaking matter. Finally, the third matter for discussion is the need to begin a rulemaking to enact the statutory changes from the 2023 legislative session, specifically creating new rules to enact House Bill 23-116 on customer-owned pipelines, and to make minor changes in the rules based on Senate Bill 285, which removes storage from the statutory definition of transportation of gas within Title 40. As part of this rulemaking, staff would also like to add an additional method of reporting pipeline incidents and events. Currently, all reporting of the pipeline incidents and events are required to be reported verbally by telephone. for Colorado pipeline incidents and events. Staff would like to add additional electronic reporting link option for the pipeline operators to be able to report directly and into our documentation and tracking system directly, which is one of the compliance requirements from our state audit. Staff is planning to provide draft rules and a notice of proposed rulemaking to the commission within the next few weeks as well for the 2023 legislative session implementation and the requested addition of the electronic Colorado incident event and recording and tracking. So I will put it out there for your discussion.
And since we're on pipeline safety, I don't know if this is you, Dr. Fishaber, or if Director White's out there, but just curious to see if you guys have any thoughts how these rules interact with the state audit, you know, and maybe a little bit of context where we're at on that. And, you know, just if we can just have an update on that. It's certainly on my agenda and probably the public's and maybe the legislature's radar screen. So if one of you could just sort of update us and talk about how this all interacts and whether that's an issue for these rules or what, that'd be great. So Director White, I see you out there.
I am. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. With regards to the audit, I'll answer the question sort of both generally and specifically in relationship to what Dr. Fishaber just covered. Generally, the state audit was overall focused on strengthening and streamlining our pipeline safety program. So I would say from the general standpoint, any activity that we are taking using our existing rulemaking authority to achieve that same goal of strengthening and streamlining is just an overall improvement to our program and our ability to have good oversight on the pipeline network out there. More specifically, recommendation 2 within the audit was specifically focused on enforcement. And then recommendation 3 required us to align the current penalties in our rules with what has been put in place both by PHMSA and the state legislature. So ALJ Farley's current rulemaking will address a specific recommendation within the audit, recommendation 3. Overall, the team, as I noted when we first brought this issue before the commission, we're taking the audit and its recommendations very seriously. We've developed a tracking system and have begun to check through the recommendations we could make most immediately. I would still like to bring a fulsome briefing to the commission on at least a quarterly basis to let you know how we're tracking towards achieving each of the recommendations and continue to do that till we have fully closed out the audit. Happy to answer any further questions on that.
Just one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Is there a federal audit process? Are we doing okay in that process, or similar concerns showing up as in the state process?
Yes, thanks for that question. So we are directly overseen and audited by the federal agency known as PHMSA. In fact, we undertake our pipeline safety program sort of on their behalf. And our responsibility and jurisdiction covers intrastate transportation pipelines. But because of the federal oversight role, they review pretty comprehensively our program on an annual basis. The federal team was just out here in Colorado a couple weeks ago, earlier in July. I think because of the state audit, we were understandably under additional scrutiny this year than we have been in the past. They sent out 2 auditors instead of the usual one, and the team did a pretty deep dive into our program. I am pleased to say that the initial feedback we have received from that audit results raised our overall points by 8. So we, out of a score of 100, Colorado's pipeline safety program has received a 96. So this, it gives me good confidence that we are both have a strong program and one that has been really rapidly improving. We've seen a continuous increase in our scores over the last few years. which aligns with a lot of the changes that Casey Hensley is making and under Dr. Fishaber's leadership. And I would expect we will continue to improve significantly in the year to come.
Well, thanks for the update, and thank you, Dr. Fishaber, for the leadership in trying to frame up rule modifications. Commissioner Plant, comments, question?
No, I would just say, I think it's really encouraging that we've been able to make changes so quickly that directly relate to the issues that were brought up in the audit. And I think that's it's a great service, and I congratulate everybody that's been involved in that.
Commissioner Gilman.
Well, thank you, Director White, for the update as it relates to the audit. I think important linkage and kind of understanding of the many moving parts here in terms of the oversight and legislation that we're trying to operate in here and be responsive to and continue to improve the program. And Dr. Fishaber, thank you for the presentation. And I agree with each of your steps moving forward in terms of the rulemakings.
So thanks so much to both of you, and look forward to seeing the draft rules and moving forward. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 23M-0234G. Ms. Rosati, Mr. Mendelson, the gas infrastructure plan.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Rosati of your Commission Counsel, and Mr. Mendelson of your advisory staff is also available for questions. This proceeding is on the agenda to discuss two items. The first is a motion for extraordinary protection filed by Public Service on July 19th and responses filed July 24th. The second item is the scheduling of a technical conference. For the first item, in its motion, Public Service defines two categories of highly confidential information. Public Service states that such information is included within work papers in this proceeding, but it also requests extraordinary protection for this information to the extent it is raised in other ways, such as through discovery. A party seeking extraordinary protection of highly confidential material under Rule 1101B must include a showing that the material is highly confidential, that the Commission's rules for furnishing confidential information provide insufficient protection, and that if adopted, the highly confidential protections will afford sufficient protection. If it works for the Commissioners, I'll plan to describe and give a recommendation for the first category before moving on to the second.
Yep, keep going.
Category 1 data refers to individual or aggregated customer information that does not comport with Commission Rule 4033B, which is the 1515 rule. This rule requires a minimum level of aggregation for the disclosure of this data. Public Service requests that disclosure of this highly confidential information be limited to the Commissioners, ALJs, Commissioned advisory staff and advisory attorneys, staff and attorneys for staff, and UCA's attorneys. Public Service states that a highly confidential work paper covers a limited specific project area with easily identifiable commercial customers, which does not comply with the rule. The company argues that without extraordinary protection, any party to this proceeding that signs an ordinary NDA could gain access to the confidential and competitively sensitive customer information. The company states that the requested protection is in line with protection granted in multiple prior proceedings. Tiger Natural Gas opposes Public Service's request regarding the Category 1 information. Tiger states that it appreciates the Commission's policies protecting customer privacy, but it is concerned that Public Service uses the rule to prevent robust litigation and to silo opposition against application to the Commission. It states that the company's use of the rule handicaps the parties and prevents them from identifying and conferring with similarly situated entities. As a cure for this problem that Tiger identifies, Tiger proposes that attorneys for all parties be permitted to review any highly confidential information, including this Category 1 information. And I can pause to answer questions, or I'm prepared to give a recommendation on this point.
Yeah, if you can give your recommendation, that'd be great.
I recommend granting the requested extraordinary protection. Tiger's arguments concerning information that does not comply with the 1515 rule fails to properly consider the customer privacy concerns and concerns around competitive advantages that the rule aims to protect.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you. Moving on to the second category of information. Public Service states that this is a proprietary, non-public cost-benefit analysis tool for each of the 5 projects that were subject to non-pipeline alternatives analysis. The company requests that access to the full executable CBA tool be limited to the commissioners, ALJs, advisory staff and attorneys, staff and staff attorneys, UCA and UCA attorneys, CEO and CEO attorneys, and conservation advocates and their attorneys. And this group is made up of NRDC, Sierra Club, SWEEP, and WRA. In a footnote, Public Service requests that if the commission decides to permit other parties access to this information, it only allow in-person review to those other parties. The company states that it developed this CBA tool in conjunction with a third-party consultant, and it states that the tool is proprietary and a trade secret under Colorado law and will be used for company business purposes. Additionally, the company notes that it will provide an input tab and a CBA summary tab for each of the subject projects in PDF format. It notes that staff, UCA, CEO are interveners of right, and it claims that the conservation advocates, as a group of policy advocates, have demonstrated a need to know this information in the context of this proceeding. Public Service states that the other parties do not have the same need to know and points to customers and competitors that may have their own business interests in this proceeding. The City and County of Denver and the City of Boulder oppose Public Service's request, which would exclude them from accessing the full CBA tool. Denver and Boulder state that Public Service does not adequately justify excluding municipal governments. They claim that Public Service reduces their role in this proceeding to solely a customer, failing to acknowledge that Denver and Boulder advocate for their community members and have recognized climate goals and an inherent interest in the environmental aspects of policy advocacy in this proceeding, much like the conservation advocates, They argue that because they do not own or operate natural gas infrastructure, and because they will not need to conduct similar CBA analysis, there is no commercial or competitive reason to exclude Denver and Boulder. Tiger Natural Gas also opposes the request regarding Category 2 information, stating that Public Service failed to establish the non-public and proprietary nature of the CBA tool, and Tiger argues that Public Service fails to show why limiting disclosure to parties, attorneys, and outside experts using the regular NDA would cause competitive harm. Denver, Boulder, and Tiger also oppose Public Service's proposal for an in-person review of Category 2 information, stating that such review is burdensome and leads to difficulties referring to information in filings. With that, I will pause for your questions or your discussion.
What do you think about the distinction between the conservation advocates and on the one hand, and the city of Boulder and Denver on the other? Any guidance? Commissioner Gilman, you want to jump in and say something else? Or go ahead.
Yeah. I'd be happy to kick us off. I mean, I think it's first important to say we're flying blind a little bit here. We've requested the work papers, but we haven't seen them yet. Word is maybe they're coming in today. So we don't actually know. Like, I don't think the commission has been able to review these documents to actually understand the proprietary nature of them, or some of the claims made. So to me, that's unfortunate, given the timing. And so I don't know, this our very first skip. I don't think we should infer much more from this as just our initial attempt, since we haven't seen any of these type of documents yet. But yeah, I don't see the distinction. I don't think that the companies really put forth any sort of persuasive argument that the city and county of Denver or Boulder are reasonably different than the other parties being given access, nor that their access to the documents presents actual competitive concerns in this situation. So I would certainly opt to include the city and county of Denver and Boulder as those that have access, not limiting that to in-person access or whatever the suggestion was, and give them their experts and attorneys access in the same way that the other parties would to that information. And further, I think it'll just be important for us to look at this information as the proceeding goes forward. I think sort of out of an abundance of caution, we can attach the highly confidential designation at this point, but I mean, we simply haven't seen these and don't 100% understand the proprietary nature of them yet.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Gilman brings up some good points. I don't know that we have the information to make a distinction, and I would agree with Commissioner Gilman. Without that kind of information, my deference would be to include the parties. But I will defer to your expertise.
I hope you're talking to Ms. Rosati, not me. I guess, Ms. Rosati, is there any concern that as customers that it's inappropriate for Denver and Boulder to get this information? I mean, we're, as Commissioner Gilman said, we're flying blind.
I will say that the motion filed by Public Service did not provide ample explanation as to why a customer having this information would be problematic.
Any advice for us?
I believe that if the commission does wish to grant Denver and Boulder access to this Category 2 information, I believe the justification in their responses that they provide similar types of advocacy as the conservation advocates do. It would provide support for that decision.
And your advice would not be to wait and let the company respond? They had the opportunity to respond and they didn't?
Denver and Boulder's responses were filed on July 24th. I don't think that responses are standard, but there was time for Public Service to file something if it had wished. Additionally, they would be able to file a motion to reconsider this decision, however it turns out. And I'll also note that currently initial comments are due August 10th. And so I think some certainty would be good here.
I think I'm good with Commissioner Gilman's proposal to allow Boulder and Denver to have access to those materials under the highly confidential designations now. Unless Commissioner Gilman or Commissioner Plant has anything else, and I'd probably deny the Tiger requests, as I think they're in a different position. So Commissioner Gilman, Commissioner Plant, anything else to add?
No, I think that's reasonable. Just some of my other comments got to, this is our first skip. We have not even seen these work papers yet. And so I think, it's my hope that as much is made public and is transparent, especially to communities interested in understanding these decisions as possible. And so I think that's something we'll figure out as we see these documents. Are they really as competitively sensitive as being portrayed by the company?
All right, and the scheduling and scope of the technical conference, I don't know if that's you, Ms. Rosati, or Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, I can kick off that conversation. So at the July 19th weekly meeting, the commission decided to schedule a technical conference on August 3rd. The company was unavailable for this date, and they are available and have committed to attending on August 14th or August 15th. And so we would open this up for your discussion, including intended scope and topics.
And do we have a timing for the 14th or 15th?
Yes, on the 14th, it would be 9 to 11 for their availability, and on the 15th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Commissioner Plant, any preference?
No, either one of those days is fine.
Commissioner Gilman?
You have a preference for the Monday, the 14th, 9 to 11 a.m.
Okay.
I can make either work,
let's-
but I think that's preferable.
Are you okay if we honor Commissioner Goman's preference, Commissioner Plant?
Sounds good.
All right, so if Ms. Rosati, if you can get that on our calendars, or somebody could get that on our calendars, that'd be great. And we need a discussion of scope.
Yes. I think just some general guidance to the company would be appropriate in terms of topics, level of detail, that kind of thing.
I have one, and then I mean, there's a bunch I'd ask about, but the one I'd flag is the safety-related investments. I think in the last PSIA filing, the company forecasted a need of, I don't know, 130 to 160 million dollars a year of integrity investment. I just couldn't tell if that's now at zero or not. Either way, I'd like to better understand the actual levels of safety investment, and to the extent there's changes since the PSIA filing, just what caused those changes. So that's one issue I'd just flag where I was confused, but Commissioner Plant?
No, I have no other issues.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, I think that's a broad area of interest in terms of what expenses are showing up in the GIP filing and which are not just in terms of the $3 million threshold, but in terms of kind of known described projects that are not appearing there. I think also I'll have questions about the assumptions in the NPA analysis. Of course, I'll reiterate, we're saying this without having seen the work papers, which will be very informative. So I've only reviewed what's in the record so far. So questions about the NPA assumptions, some questions about how the company determines what to do, how to dispose of the existing infrastructure, whether it's abandoned in place or removed. I have some questions about the existing system assessment section. I have questions around the stage gate process and how that matches up with the level of progress we're seeing in some of the specific projects presented. A few questions around the hydrogen pilot, including greenhouse gas impacts of the project, and probably more broadly around how the company has projected greenhouse gas impacts of the listed projects. And yeah, so that's my list so far. Not exactly a promise since I haven't seen the work papers, but those are the issues that I anticipate being the most interested in asking questions about.
Perfect. So Ms. Rosati, I think that can be an ABC decision, granting the motion for protective order along the lines of our discussion, and scheduling the technical conference for the morning of August 14th with some questions as outlined by Commissioner Goman, myself. Does that give you everything you need?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Proceeding number 23V-0381G, Mr. Gomez, Atmos and Black Hills, request for a variance. Save the best for last, Mr. Gomez.
I always love bringing up the rear. So I will make this quick because I know everybody's wants to get out of here. This is a joint petition of Atmos Energy Corporation and Black Hills, Colorado Gas, for approval of a variance from Rule 4602H. So if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, you granted a temporary variance to Public Service Company with regard to the same gas purchase incentive mechanism under the GCA rules. Basically, this is a Me Too filing by Atmos and Black Hills. What they are asking is because they have to file their GPIM by a date certain, and SB 23291, which impacts gas utilities by requiring those utilities to file a gas price risk management plan by November 1. to level or reduce the volatility of fuel costs that are recovered pursuant to utilities gas cost adjustment filings. So they're concerned that similarly to public service, that there's going to be overlap and a redundancy between those two. So they are also asking for a, their petition is a little different. They're asking for a partial variance, delaying the filing of their initial GPIM until 90 days after public service files its initial GPIM, consistent with Rule 4602. Or in the alternative, they're asking for a full variance if the commission ultimately decides what to do with public services request for variance that it granted a couple of weeks ago. So that's basically what Atmos and Black Hills are looking for. Like I said, it's very similar to what public service filed. As you'll recall in the discussion we had with regard to public services petition for temporary variance, you granted that and then left open to bring that back at a future time to discuss whether to make that a permanent variance from filing the GPIM. Or what to do with that. So actually, that will need to come back. Both of these will need to come back at a future time. This one today, Atmos and Black Hills, is only on for making a determination of whether to shorten the response time and intervention period to 5 days. And I recommend you grant that request. And also they had requested a expedited decision on the issue, and the commission issue a decision on the merits no later than August 30th. And I think that you probably have to do that anyway, so I see no problem with granting that. But just wanted to point out, since this was filed now, that at some point, while it wasn't in the public service decision, but you did have that discussion about bringing that back at a future date to make a specific determination as to what to do with their GPIM filing.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Goodman?
I agree.
As do I, and that can be an ABC order, Mr. Gomez. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks to both of you and to everyone for a long morning. Commissioner Plant, any final thoughts before we adjourn?
No, that was a good meeting. Thanks.
Commissioner Goman, your eye looks much better. So
it's hanging in there. Thank you for bearing with me for all the blinking of the eye, but no, I have nothing additional. Thanks.
All right, with that, thanks to all. We're adjourned. See you next time.